I wasn't expecting the invitation. The last time I spoke to my brother Brian, it was an obligatory 3-minute call on our mother's birthday. No warmth, just two adults pretending we were too busy to care. So when the envelope arrived, cream stock, gold foil edges, thick as a wedding check, I thought it was a vendor promo. It wasn't. It was a warning wrapped in formality. Inside the card read, "Mr. and Mrs. Charles Sinclair request the honor of your presence at the wedding of their daughter, Whitney Sinclair, to Mr. Brian Carter." That was it. No Juliana, no handwritten note, no acknowledgement beyond the perfunctory line, "Hanen guest." I stood in my kitchen, barefoot, coffee cooling in my hand, staring at those words, "and guest," like they were a velvet-gloved slap. They could have called, texted, sent an email, but that's not how my family does things. They prefer distance dressed in decorum. My parents, Gregory and Elaine Carter, care more about how things look than who gets hurt. The country club, the Christmas card, the right colleges, the right cocktail stories. Brian was their prize. I was the exception. He was football games, frat ties, and dad's pride. I was coding at 14 and winning science fairs they never attended. While he got steak dinners for B+s, I got a fridge note that said, "Proud of you, Jules," usually pinned under a flyer for Brian's next game. I flipped the RSVP over. Blank. Just a deadline to reply and a return envelope. No, can't wait to see you. No, we're so excited. Just a slot to check a box. He's marrying into oil money, I thought, sipping my now cold coffee. And I'm still the sister they can't quite label at dinner parties. Still doing that software thing? That thing was Carter Core Systems, my supply chain optimization company. We'd just closed a $30 million contract with Sinclair Global. Yes. That Sinclair? Funny how fate works. I didn't know the connection at first. We pitched to Sinclair Global like we did every client, on merit. Their COO, Eleanor Wright, had seen me speak in Chicago. I led every demo, every audit. It wasn't until our final call that Charles Sinclair squinted into the Zoom and said, "Wait, Carter, are you related to Brian Carter?" "Older sister," I said, without smiling. "Well, I'll be damned," he chuckled. Here I thought the smartest woman I've met in tech was just a lucky hire. A billionaire had to say it before anyone in my family ever did. Smartest woman in tech. That's what he called me. My family still calls me Jules, like I'm 12 and hiding in the garage building robots with duct tape. I didn't need them to brag. I just wanted them to see. I circled "will attend" in black ink. Not for the vows, not for the cake, not even for the slideshow I probably wouldn't be in. I was going to show up, for one reason, to remind them that the girl they dismissed now signs contracts that hold their empire together. The wedding would be held at Sinclair Ranch, just outside Fredericksburg, 150 acres of wine country luxury and generational wealth. My mother described it like a showroom. Elegant but exclusive. Whitney has a snack stylist for her bridal suite. She never said if they were happy I'd be there. She never asked if I wanted to come. Derek, my boyfriend of 4 months, scanned the invite without speaking. He's smart, measured, runs a venture fund in Austin. We met at a tech roundtable. He knew who I was before I had to explain. That's rare. "You sure you want to go?" he asked finally. This reads like a warning disguised as calligraphy. I looked at him. That's exactly why I'm going. Success taught me something. Silence isn't grace. It's erasure. And I'd spent too long being polite while they wrote me out of every story. They sent me an invitation without my name. That was their first mistake. Showing up wouldn't be my revenge. It would be my opening move. Brian was born 20 months after me, but you'd think the world waited for him to arrive before it started spinning. From the moment he could throw a football and say, "Yes, sir," my parents treated him like royalty blessed in a bassinet. Every A- was framed. Every touchdown got balloons. I once made the regional science fair finals, and my mom said, "Oh, sweetie, I forgot to charge the camera. Can you recreate it at home?" It wasn't favoritism, it was policy. As kids, we were close. Backyard forts, Lego battles, summer treasure maps we drew on napkins. But the split came early, somewhere around middle school. Brian played sports. I built websites. He got cheers. I got quiet nods. By high school, he was the future of Carter construction. I was our little tech genius, always said with a smile that never quite reached their eyes. I still remember the Christmas I turned 15. Brian got a brand new mountain bike, hydraulic suspension, custom seat, the kind with its own spotlight in the catalog. I got a second-hand graphing calculator in a box that wasn't even wrapped. "She loves numbers," my dad said. Brian rode wheelies through the living room. I Googled scholarships on the staircase, fingers curled around plastic buttons that stuck when I pressed too hard. That staircase became my war zone. I studied there, cried there, took acceptance calls there. When MIT emailed with a full scholarship, I screamed so loud the dog barked. My mother walked in with a mascara wand midair and whispered, "Sweetheart, can it wait? Your brother's college recruiter is on speaker." It couldn't, but I did. College was my escape plan. MIT was everything Carter, Texas wasn't: diverse, electric, intense. I didn't feel like I had to dim anything to be taken seriously, but even in Boston, I heard their voices in my head. Don't get too proud. Don't be too much. When I landed a freshman AI research position, I called home beaming. My mom responded, "That's great, but guess what? Brian's team made playoffs. Can you believe it?" I could believe it. I'd been trained to. Meanwhile, Brian coasted. His grades were average. His internships came through family friends. My father slid him into a management role at Carter Construction as if competence was inherited. I built Carter Core out of a cramped Austin apartment, living off boxed noodles and silent rage, pitching in coffee shops, coding till my wrists hurt. They never visited. Not once. Year 3 of Carter Core, I signed my first client. Year 4, we broke even. Year 5, we hit national expos. By the time I made the Forbes Founders to Watch list, my mother texted, "That's impressive. Brian just bought a boat with his promotion bonus." A boat. He was VP of a company he didn't build. I was building a company they didn't ask about. So no, the wedding invitation didn't surprise me because it was cold. It surprised me because it was familiar. A recycled script. Same message. New stationery. They still saw me as the girl who got the calculator and the polite applause, the one who funded her own seat just to be placed behind the kitchen curtain. Brian's engagement wasn't a love story, it was a business merger. Whitney Sinclair had perfect teeth, perfect posture, and generational wealth deep enough to buy naming rights to things. Their relationship was curated. Yacht weekends, champagne captions, soft launches on social media, 2 last names, 1 legacy, a strategic alliance sealed with a diamond. I didn't blame her. I blamed the machine that had polished Brian since birth. He'd been told he was chosen, so he never thought to question it. But I had. And by the time that invitation landed, something inside me had calcified. I wasn't going to that wedding to reconcile. I was going to show up, look them all in the eye, and remind them, "You can write me out of your speeches, but not out of your systems." Let them smile. I had other ways of being remembered. The first office I ever leased was smaller than my freshman dorm. It was a second-story walk-up above a dry cleaner in South Austin, with 1 drafty window, no central air, and a door that only locked if you kicked it first. But it had space. Space for 2 folding desks, a whiteboard I found on Craigslist, and a second-hand mini-fridge that hummed like an idling truck. To me, it was perfect. To my parents, it didn't exist. I sent them a photo the day I got the keys, me standing proudly with the lease in one hand and a takeout burrito in the other. My dad didn't reply. My mom texted, "Looks cozy, don't work too hard." They never asked what I was building. Carter Core started with a problem. Every logistics manager I interviewed, at warehouses, trucking firms, even Amazon subcontractors, complained about the same thing: inefficiencies between inventory data and real-world demand. Software existed, but it was bloated, outdated, or designed by teams who had never touched a packing label. So I rolled up my sleeves. For 18 months, I lived off ramen, walked to save gas, and coded through weekends while balancing a freelance consulting gig to pay the rent. I built my first prototype on a refurbished MacBook held together with duct tape and faith. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. I'll never forget my first pitch. I was wearing a blazer 2 sizes too big and heels that pinched like hell. It was at a WeWork conference room downtown. 10 people, mostly bored. One investor, Gregory Phillips, stayed after. He was clean-cut, ex-military, all numbers. "You're scrappy," he said, after watching me diagram an AI-based demand prediction algorithm using 2 dry erase markers and a soda can. "I like Scrappy. Scrappy solves problems." He wired $100,000 the next day. With Gregory's backing, I hired 2 interns and 1 full-time developer. We slept in shifts during the first deployment, ate Thai takeout on the floor, launched updates at 2 a.m. to avoid server lag. One of my interns wrote an entire pricing module during a power outage, coding by flashlight while I held the surge protector in my lap. Those first 2 years were brutal. Not hard, brutal. I missed birthdays, lost friends, burned out a relationship, and nearly collapsed in a gas station parking lot from caffeine overload. But we shipped, we scaled, we survived. By year 3, Carter Core had 5 employees and our first real office, a 1,200 square foot space in East Austin with actual chairs and our name on the glass. I had a logo, a product suite, and paying customers. I remember calling home that week, riding the high of a newly inked $2.2 million deal with a regional logistics chain. I was breathless. I thought maybe, this time, they'd see it. My mother answered, distracted. "Sweetheart, that's nice, but your brother just bought a boat. Can you believe it? With his promotion bonus." I blinked. "What does Brian even need a boat for?" "Fishing trips with Charles and the guys, business bonding." That was the moment I knew they'd never get it. I was closing 7-figure contracts, hiring staff, and presenting at conferences alongside companies 10 times our size. But as far as my family was concerned, I was still their computer genius, who never outgrew her weird high school phase. I stopped calling after that. But Carter Core kept rising. We expanded into cold chain tracking, warehouse automation plugins, and predictive inventory models that slashed waste and increased delivery efficiency by 18% on average. Big names started circling: food distributors, national retailers, infrastructure players. I began flying twice a month, speaking at panels, giving interviews, consulting for tech boards. Some weeks I lived more in airports than my apartment. Still, not a single word from Brian. Not even when I made the cover of Austin Business Monthly under the headline, "The Woman Fixing America's Supply Chain One Line of Code at a Time." By year 6, we hit $11 million in annual recurring revenue. I bought a townhome with views of Lady Bird Lake and paid off every cent of my student loans in one wire transfer. I got invited to dinners with investors I used to cold email. At a gala in Houston, a VP from a major real estate group approached me after my keynote. "You're Juliana Carter, the Carter Core founder?" he asked. "Why doesn't your family ever talk about you?" I smiled. I stopped asking that question a long time ago. When Sinclair Global came knocking, it wasn't through my brother or his fiancée. It was their COO, Eleanor Wright, who saw one of my team's presentations at a supply chain innovation summit in Chicago. We didn't know the family connection at first. They were looking for a software partner to overhaul their logistics for a multi-state expansion plan, complex operations with multi-billion-dollar implications. We were on their shortlist within 2 weeks. It took 3 months of pitches, demos, security audits, compliance reviews, and executive Q&As. I led every meeting. I closed the deal. The final contract was valued at $30 million over 3 years, with provisions for scaling into international operations. It was the largest contract in Carter Core history. My team took me out for champagne and tacos. We laughed until 1 a.m. I didn't call my family. I didn't need to. That's why the wedding invitation hit so hard. Not because I needed their praise, but because I had delivered something so concrete, so measurable, so valuable, and it still wasn't enough to earn me a name on a card. After everything I'd built, they still saw me as the girl who sat too close to the router and skipped prom to build a budgeting app. They didn't ignore me because I'd failed. They ignored me because I succeeded without them. The first office I ever leased was smaller than my freshman dorm. It was a second-story walk-up above a dry cleaner in South Austin, with one drafty window, no central air, and a door that only locked if you kicked it first. But it had space. Space for 2 folding desks, a whiteboard I found on Craigslist, and a second-hand mini-fridge that hummed like an idling truck. To me, it was perfect. To my parents, it didn't exist. I sent them a photo the day I got the keys, me standing proudly with the lease in one hand and a takeout burrito in the other. My dad didn't reply. My mom texted, "Looks cozy, don't work too hard." They never asked what I was building. Carter Core started with a problem. Every logistics manager I interviewed, at warehouses, trucking firms, even Amazon subcontractors, complained about the same thing: inefficiencies between inventory data and real-world demand. Software existed, but it was bloated, outdated, or designed by teams who had never touched a packing label. So I rolled up my sleeves. For 18 months, I lived off ramen, walked to save gas, and coded through weekends while balancing a freelance consulting gig to pay the rent. I built my first prototype on a refurbished MacBook held together with duct tape and faith. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. I'll never forget my first pitch. I was wearing a blazer 2 sizes too big and heels that pinched like hell. It was at a WeWork conference room downtown. 10 people, mostly bored. One investor, Gregory Phillips, stayed after. He was clean-cut, ex-military, all numbers. "You're scrappy," he said, after watching me diagram an AI-based demand prediction algorithm using 2 dry erase markers and a soda can. "I like scrappy. Scrappy solves problems." He wired $100,000 the next day. With Gregory's backing, I hired 2 interns and 1 full-time developer. We slept in shifts during the first deployment, ate Thai takeout on the floor, launched updates at 2 a.m. to avoid server lag. One of my interns wrote an entire pricing module during a power outage, coding by flashlight while I held the surge protector in my lap. Those first 2 years were brutal. Not hard, brutal. I missed birthdays, lost friends, burned out a relationship, and nearly collapsed in a gas station parking lot from caffeine overload. But we shipped, we scaled, we survived. By year 3, Carter Core had 5 employees and our first real office, a 1,200 square foot space in East Austin with actual chairs and our name on the glass. I had a logo, a product suite, and paying customers. I remember calling home that week, riding the high of a newly inked $2.2 million deal with a regional logistics chain. I was breathless. I thought maybe, this time, they'd see it. My mother answered, distracted. "Sweetheart, that's nice, but your brother just bought a boat. Can you believe it? With his promotion bonus." I blinked. "What does Brian even need a boat for?" "Fishing trips with Charles and the guys, business bonding." That was the moment I knew they'd never get it. I was closing 7-figure contracts, hiring staff, and presenting at conferences alongside companies 10 times our size. But as far as my family was concerned, I was still their computer genius, who never outgrew her weird high school phase. I stopped calling after that. But Carter Core kept rising. We expanded into cold chain tracking, warehouse automation plugins, and predictive inventory models that slashed waste and increased delivery efficiency by 18% on average. Big names started circling: food distributors, national retailers, infrastructure players. I began flying twice a month, speaking at panels, giving interviews, consulting for tech boards. Some weeks I lived more in airports than my apartment. Still, not a single word from Brian. Not even when I made the cover of Austin Business Monthly under the headline, "The Woman Fixing America's Supply Chain One Line of Code at a Time." By year 6, we hit $11 million in annual recurring revenue. I bought a townhome with views of Lady Bird Lake and paid off every cent of my student loans in one wire transfer. I got invited to dinners with investors I used to cold email. At a gala in Houston, a VP from a major real estate group approached me after my keynote. "You're Juliana Carter, the Carter Core founder?" he asked. "Why doesn't your family ever talk about you?" I smiled. I stopped asking that question a long time ago. When Sinclair Global came knocking, it wasn't through my brother or his fiancée. It was their COO, Eleanor Wright, who saw one of my team's presentations at a supply chain innovation summit in Chicago. We didn't know the family connection at first. They were looking for a software partner to overhaul their logistics for a multi-state expansion plan, complex operations with multi-billion-dollar implications. We were on their shortlist within 2 weeks. It took 3 months of pitches, demos, security audits, compliance reviews, and executive Q&As. I led every meeting. I closed the deal. The final contract was valued at $30 million over 3 years, with provisions for scaling into international operations. It was the largest contract in Carter Corps history. My team took me out for champagne and tacos. We laughed until 1 a.m. I didn't call my family. I didn't need to. That's why the wedding invitation hit so hard. Not because I needed their praise, but because I had delivered something so concrete, so measurable, so valuable, and it still wasn't enough to earn me a name on a card. After everything I'd built, they still saw me as the girl who sat too close to the router and skipped prom to build a budgeting app. They didn't ignore me because I'd failed. They ignored me because I succeeded without them. The Sinclair Ranch was everything I expected, and nothing like I remembered. I'd been there once before, years ago, during a fundraiser my father had dragged me to, but that had been in winter, when the hills were dry and the air carried cedar and frost. This time it was spring. The wildflowers were blooming, the grass was freshly cut and lined like a golf course fairway, and the sky overhead was so painfully blue it almost looked artificial. Derek and I arrived just after 4. Valets in white gloves greeted us like they'd been rehearsed. The welcome table featured hand-calligraphed name cards in gold script, monogrammed linen gift bags, and glass bottles of imported spring water chilled on crushed ice. There were at least 50 people milling around already, all of them dressed in muted pastels and designer brands I only recognized from pitch meetings and magazine covers. I wore navy blue. We stepped inside the main house, a modern ranch-style mansion with white stone walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, and gallery lighting that made everything and everyone look curated. A live string quartet played in the entryway. Waitstaff passed flutes of something French. Everything was soft-edged, expensive, and quietly watchful. My mother found me first. "Juliana," she chirped, air-kissing my cheek. "You're here, and who's this handsome man?" "Derek Lawson," he said with a confident nod. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Carter." She gave him a once-over that was half polite and half inspection. "Well, you clean up well. I hope you two aren't staying at that Airbnb you mentioned. The Sinclairs are hosting at the guest cottages." "We're staying at the resort 10 minutes down the road," I said. "Oh," a pause. "Of course, that's lovely too." Before I could say more, she pivoted. "Your father is on the terrace with Charles. Brian's finalizing the groomsmen photos. Whitney's somewhere inside. She's been managing the wedding planner like a CEO." She didn't say it with irony. I felt Derek's hand graze mine. A small reminder, you're not alone here. The terrace looked like something out of an architecture magazine. Fire bowls, modern teak furniture, a view of the rolling Texas hill country that stretched for miles. My father stood in a cluster of men near the railing, laughing too hard at something Charles Sinclair said. When he saw me, his smile faltered, then returned with the practiced ease of someone hitting the same button he'd used for decades. "There she is," he said, clapping my shoulder like we were teammates. "Our tech genius. Heard you signed a pretty big contract with Charles." I raised a brow. "A pretty big contract?" "30 million, Charles added, stepping forward. "And already saving us a fortune in logistics." He shook my hand firmly. "You've built something remarkable. I have to admit, I was shocked when I found out you were Brian's sister." "You're not the only one," I said evenly. The other men looked at me differently after that, less like Brian's relative and more like someone they'd Googled and should have known earlier. I could feel the recalibration in their posture. And yet, my father still said it. "You know, Brian was the one who first told Charles about Carter Corps, always looking out for his sister." That wasn't just false, it was strategic. It allowed them to keep me in the background while still claiming my work. Before I could correct him, a gust of perfume and tools swept onto the terrace. Whitney Sinclair. She looked every bit the heiress bride, radiant, composed, and photogenic in a blush-toned designer gown that clung in all the right places. Her blonde hair was styled in waves that screamed money. Diamonds winked at her ears. She air-kissed my cheeks like we'd met 100 times. "Juliana, I'm so glad you made it! And in Navy! So practical!" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I smiled back. "Congratulations, Whitney. Everything looks very curated." She beamed. Daddy spared no expense. I had been disrespected by my family in subtle ways for years, talked over at dinners, forgotten in photo albums, edited out of Brian's highlight reels, but this wasn't subtle. Table O was no accident. It wasn't a mistake or a clerical error or some oversight in a sea of planning chaos. It was a message. And it was loud. The kitchen tent bustled a few feet away. I could hear the clatter of pans, the hiss of gas burners, and the occasional barked instruction from the catering staff. The edge of Table O practically brushed the catering entrance flap. We weren't near the family table. We weren't even near guests. We were staff adjacent. A clear boundary line had been drawn, and I had been seated on the wrong side of it. Derek stood beside me, arms crossed. His silence said more than words could. "I RSVP'd 2 months ago," I murmured. "I signed a $30 million contract with this family's company, and this is where they put me." He turned to me. "You want to leave?" "No," I said. "Not yet." A woman in a headset and all black approached us, holding a tablet. "Miss Carter?" she asked, hesitant. "Yes?" "There's been a change in the seating arrangement. I apologize. Table O is your updated assignment. I believe it's listed correctly here on the chart." "It's next to the kitchen," I said flatly. She winced. "We had several last-minute guest additions to the family section. Business associates of Mr. Sinclair, very high profile. It was a tough shuffle." "So the solution," Derek said slowly, "was to move the CEO of Carter Core Systems out of the reception and into the staff corridor?" The woman froze. I saw the fear flash in her eyes. She hadn't known. "I'm just following the chart," she said quietly. "The final version was approved by the bride this morning." I nodded. "Thank you." She blinked. "Sorry?" "You're just doing your job," I said. "Thank you for the information." She dipped her head and walked away. Derek turned toward me. "You're calm." "I'm not calm," I said. "I'm focused." Back in the main tent, laughter rang out as guests sipped wine and admired the sunset. Inside that curated bubble, everyone was a version of themselves designed for this event. Glossy, well-dressed, socially armored. Brian was at the head table, posing for photos with Whitney, their bodies angled perfectly for the camera. My mother stood behind them, adjusting her pearl bracelet and smiling like she'd finally achieved the family merger she'd always dreamed of. No one noticed me standing in the shadow of the catering tent. I pulled out my phone. "Gregory," I said when my COO answered. "It's Juliana." "Everything okay?" "Quick question. How fast can legal initiate an opt-out trigger for Sinclair?" He paused. "You want to cancel?" "I want to be prepared," I replied. "Something's happened. I'll explain later. For now, just review the clause and confirm how quickly we could disengage if needed." He didn't ask more. He knew me well enough. "Got it. I'll get you a timeline within the hour." I put the phone away and exhaled slowly. I had been quiet too long. Professional, gracious, strategic. I had smiled at meetings where I wasn't introduced. I had answered questions from men who assumed I was the assistant. I had built systems that made other people rich and stayed polite when they tried to take the credit. But they'd seated me by the kitchen, at my own brother's wedding, and that wasn't just rude, it was public. "Still want to stay?" Derek asked. "I do." "What's the move?" "Let's sit down. Let them see us sit where they put us. Let them feel the choice they made." "And then?" "Then," I said, "we remind them who they underestimated." We sat. The tablecloth was wrinkled. Our chairs were mismatched. The catering staff looked at us with confusion, pity, and mild panic. One of the chefs sent over 2 glasses of champagne with a wink. "On me," he whispered. "This is messed up." I smiled. "Thanks." Derek raised his glass. "To being underestimated." I touched mine to his. "To being remembered." From our angle, we had a clear view of the reception. I watched Brian give a toast about legacy, family, and building something that lasts. I saw Whitney nod approvingly, the picture of a dutiful heiress. Charles laughed loudly at some joke. My father clinked his glass and leaned toward a group of investors I recognized from press releases. Not one of them looked our way, and it was the last time they would have that luxury. The rehearsal dinner ended around 9:30 p.m., but I stayed seated at table O for another 20 minutes after the music faded and the staff began clearing wine glasses. Derek stayed too, silent beside me, his expression unreadable. Guests drifted toward the fire pit for s'mores and cigars. We were invisible again, by design, not accident. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. And I had questions. Brian texted just after 10. "You still here?" I stared at the screen. "Yeah. Wanna talk?" I sent. "Come to the library, back of the main house, Schiffen du Schur." Derek looked at me. "Want me there?" "No," I said. "This one's mine." The Sinclair Library was exactly what you'd expect from people who stage wealth like theater. Floor-to-ceiling walnut shelves lined with first editions, none of which looked touched. A chandelier dimmed to an Instagram filter glow, 2 leather club chairs facing a massive stone fireplace, though the Texas night needed no warmth. Brian was already there, pacing in his shirt sleeves, tie loosened like he'd just finished pitching a $1 million idea and was too tired to pretend it wasn't borrowed. He looked up when I walked in. "Hey," he said, like we were catching up over coffee. I shut the door, slowly. "You approved the seating chart?" I asked. He blinked. "What?" "You signed off on it. This morning. Whitney made last-minute changes. You knew." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Jules, don't do this tonight." "You sat me at a table behind the kitchen, Brian." "You think I chose that? Do you know how crazy things have been this week? Whitney's been losing her mind. Her dad invited 6 new investors last minute. The planner had to reassign like 3 tables. It's not personal." "Not personal?" My voice was soft now, more dangerous than loud. "I'm your sister, the CEO of the company that just closed a $30 million deal with your future father-in-law, and you thought that was a good table? I didn't know it would be that bad." "But you knew I wasn't sitting with the family. You let it happen." Silence. And there it was. Not denial, not regret, just confirmation. Brian sat down, avoiding my gaze. "This weekend isn't about you, Jules. It's about optics, about building a future." I didn't move. "A future built on erasing me?" "Oh, come on." "Don't come on me," I snapped. "You've been doing this for years. I launch a company, you say nothing. I land Forbes coverage, you say nothing. I close the biggest deal in Carter Core history, with your in-laws, and I get a folding chair by the food tent. Because every time we talk, it's about your company," he said suddenly. "Your deals, your milestones. You never ask about mine." "Because yours were handed to you," I said coldly. "Mine nearly broke me to build." That landed. He looked away. For a moment, I almost softened, until he added, "You're successful, Juliana. Isn't that enough?" And that's when I knew. He genuinely believed my success meant I didn't deserve respect. "It's not about enough," I said. "It's about what you've done with the power I gave you." He looked confused. "What power?" "The Sinclair contract wouldn't exist without me, and you're using it to prop up your image, letting them think you made the connection, letting your fiancé treat me like a PR liability. You think this ends well for you?" "It ends with me married to Whitney," he said. "You really want to screw that up over a seating chart?" "No," I said, "but I might screw it up over a pattern." His jaw tightened. "This is business, not family." "That's the first honest thing you've said all night." I turned and walked out before he could answer. Outside, the sky was deep navy, stars crisp and unapologetic. Derek was waiting near the valet station, hands in his pockets, calm as ever. How'd it go? He told me it's not about me, I said. Derek raised an eyebrow. Ah, classic move. I slid my phone from my clutch and sent one message to Gregory. Start drafting the exit trigger for Sinclair. I'll explain in the morning. Then I looked at Derek. Let's get out of here. We left the ranch under a velvet Texas sky, the glow of chandeliers behind us fading into the rear view. I didn't look back. Because I wasn't done, I was just getting started. By the time I woke up Saturday morning, the sun had barely risen over the hills. Light spilled through the curtains of the resort suite in soft amber strips, but my mind was already sharp. No grogginess, no second thoughts. Just clarity. I'd spent the last 24 hours being treated like a vendor, like an afterthought, a background character in a celebration built partly on the infrastructure I created. That mistake was theirs. Correcting it would be mine. The wedding ceremony was set for 4 p.m. sharp on the main lawn, under a custom-built pergola wrapped in imported orchids. Guests would begin arriving by 2:30 for cocktails and pre-ceremony photos. The Sinclair team had been planning this event for 8 months. It was flawless. Too flawless. Whitney had curated every detail down to the monogrammed fans and gluten-free appetizers. But there was one thing she couldn't control. Me. I dressed deliberately. Not for beauty. For power. A black sheath dress, sharp-lined, sleeveless, minimal. Diamond studs, hair up. No sparkle, no softness, just presence, the kind that speaks before you do. Derek watched from the edge of the room, tying his cufflinks slowly. Are you sure you want to go back? Yes. After last night? Especially after last night. When we pulled up to Sinclair Ranch just before 3 o'clock, the valet didn't hesitate this time. Miss Carter, Mr. Lawson, welcome back. No surprise, no confusion. Word had gotten around. I stepped out of the car with the calm of someone who had just submitted a multi-million-dollar exit clause and dared the world to blink. Inside the main tent, chatter swelled over string quartet music. The guest list had grown: venture partners, lobbyists, media. I recognized several faces from Austin's tech and political scene. They hadn't come for love. They'd come for connections. They'd come for Sinclair, which meant they were already using my product without knowing it. Whitney spotted me first. She was across the tent, all white silk and coordinated grace, camera ready in every step. "Juliana," she said, gliding over, "you look dramatic." "Thanks," I replied. She gestured vaguely behind me. "You should grab a seat. The ceremony's starting soon. We put you at the outer row near the fountain. The lighting is better over there anyway." The outer row. I smiled. "You're the bride, Whitney. You get to choose the visuals." She blinked. That wasn't a compliment, and she knew it. Derek led the way to our seats. Outer row was correct. Again, out of the center, out of the frame, but just close enough to keep me from complaining without sounding petty. Classic power move. Obscure. Deniable. But here's the thing about sidelining people who build systems. We know how systems collapse. I sat with my chin up, posture perfect. People noticed, not because I was loud, because I was still, commanding, not smiling, not trying, just there. And slowly they began to whisper. "Is that Juliana Carter?" "She's with Carter Corps, right? Didn't she just ink a Sinclair contract?" "I thought she was family. Why is she out here?" It spread like wildfire in an upscale whisper. No one asked me directly. They asked around me, and I made no move to correct it. Instead, I leaned over to Derek and said just loud enough, "Let's not stay for the cake." He nodded. "You thinking press release?" "I'm thinking timing." The ceremony began. Whitney walked down the aisle to soft piano. Brian stood there, buttoned and blank-faced, eyes straight ahead. I watched them both like an analyst, not a guest. I watched how they shook hands with power instead of holding them with love. I watched the brand unfold, not the vows. There were smiles, but no warmth. Applause, but no emotion. Everything about this wedding had been designed for show, so I decided to make mine too. After the ceremony, we moved into the reception tent. Same tent, different seating plan. This time, my name was nowhere to be found. No table O, no table at all. They had removed me entirely. Derek looked at me. Your call. I smiled. One more walkthrough. We circled the room once. People watched, whispered. Then I turned and exited through the kitchen. Behind the white canvas curtain, chefs moved like a pit crew, plating salads and pouring wine. One of them looked up. Back again? I nodded. Same seat? He smirked. Reserved just for you. We sat for exactly 7 minutes. Then I stood, checked my phone, and opened my email. Subject, Sinclair Global, Notice of Contract Withdrawal. To, Charles Sinclair, Eleanor Wright. CC, Brian Carter, Carter Core Legal. Attachment, termination.pdf. I hit send. The message was simple. 30-day notice, per clause 5.3. No further meetings, no ongoing support. Effective immediately. By the time the first dance began, the contract that held half the logistics of their next expansion was already dissolving. No ceremony, no confrontation. Just quiet, clean consequence. It started with a phone vibrating against crystal glass. One of the Sinclair executives had left his phone on the reception table, face up, screen lit. The text was brief, sent from Eleanor Wright. Contract terminated. Carter Core is pulling out. Confirmed. Get Charles now. He didn't mean to read it out loud, but he did. And then the glass broke. I was already walking toward the exit when it happened. Derek at my side, the buzz of string music and carefully plated entrees fading behind us. Then came the hush, like the sound had been sucked out of the tent, followed by a single voice, sharp and rising. What do you mean she terminated the contract? Charles Sinclair's voice didn't carry. It detonated. I didn't look back, but I heard him. Tables clattered, chairs scraped. The illusion of elegance collapsed like scaffolding in a windstorm, and in the span of one champagne toast, the $30 million foundation of Sinclair's expansion plan was gone. Just like that. Inside the tent, chaos bloomed. Phones were pulled out of purses and pockets like weapons. Charles grabbed Brian by the arm, face red, barking questions. Whitney stood frozen mid-pose, bouquet limp in one hand, guests circling her like sharks. What happened? Who did this? Why was I CC'd? I didn't need to stay to know what came next. The caterer, confused by the sudden disruption, started delaying service. The band stopped. Someone spilled wine down the center aisle trying to dodge a phone call. Brian's best man tried to reset the mood with a laugh, but even he knew. This wasn't a mood. It was a reckoning, and it had been signed with my name. By the time Charles stormed into the driveway looking for me, we were already pulling out. He spotted us, shouted, "Juliana, what the hell is this?" I rolled the window down 2 inches, calm, ice. Clause 5.3, you signed it. You can't just walk away from this. I already did. He looked like a man trying to negotiate with a hurricane. Do you know what this does to us? Yes. You gave your word. And your family gave me a folding chair. Brian emerged behind him, face pale, hands out like a man approaching a spooked animal. Jules, wait. We can fix this. No, Brian, you can't. You're blowing this out of proportion. I built the proportion, I said, and you erased it. I rolled the window up and didn't look back. Charles was already yelling into a phone. Brian stood in the gravel, stuck between a wedding and a collapse, and I had never felt more in control. That night I sat on the hotel balcony with Derek, sipping bourbon and watching the stars thicken above the hills. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. This wasn't revenge. It was rebalancing. By midnight, news had hit the Sinclair board. By morning, Eleanor Wright had issued a hold order on 3 facility launches. By Monday, 3 investor calls were rescheduled, pending clarification of operational continuity. I never said a word publicly. I didn't need to. The wedding press release, originally scheduled for Sunday, was quietly scrapped. The photos weren't published. The video team was told to delay the highlight reel. No one wanted to attach a love story to a $30 million disaster. Meanwhile, the media, tech, and business blogs were already swirling. Carter Corp's quiet withdrawal caught attention for its mystery. Industry insiders speculated about what went wrong, but the people who mattered knew the truth. And they knew exactly who pulled the trigger. Derek handed me a mock-up of our internal press memo Monday morning. It read, Carter Corp Systems confirms voluntary exit from Sinclair Global contract. We remain committed to partnerships that align with our values, visibility, and respect. I signed it. No edits. I didn't need to torch their company. I just needed to remind them that I wasn't invisible, that I could walk into a room full of people who underestimated me, and leave as the only one who didn't need an invitation to lead. The email came 2 days after the wedding. Subject line, Can we talk? Sender, Brian Carter. Timestamp, 2:17 a.m. There was no body to the message, just that one-line subject, and a deafening silence underneath it. I stared at it for a full minute before clicking Mark Unread and going back to my spreadsheet. It wasn't time for explanations. Not yet. The next day, it came again. This time, a text. Brian. Jules. I need to understand. We lost 4 vendor meetings this morning. The board is asking questions. What happened? He wanted clarity. I wanted acknowledgement. One of us was going to get what we wanted. I waited another day, let the pressure build. Then I replied with a meeting invite. 15 minutes. Virtual, Thursday, 8:30 a.m. No reschedules. He accepted within 90 seconds. The call started exactly on time. He logged in from what looked like his office. Neatly staged, no personal effects, clean backdrop. I could see it in his posture before he spoke. He wasn't calling as my brother. He was calling as VP of a company I'd just disrupted. Thanks for taking this, he said, voice calm, practiced. I didn't smile. You asked to talk. I'm here. He nodded. I guess I'll just say it. Why? Why did I withdraw the contract? I asked. Yeah, he said. You could have come to me, given me a heads up. You blindsided us. You sat me next to the kitchen. He blinked. You're still on that? I'm still on everything, I said. I'm on the seating, the silence, the credit you took, the credit you let others give you, the way my name was left off of every document, every briefing, every toast. That contract existed because of me. I was written out of my own work. Brian looked away. This was a wedding, Juliana, not a boardroom. No, I said. This was always a boardroom. Your fiancé used it as a PR campaign. Your father-in-law treated it like a launch party. And you used it to polish your role at Sinclair. He rubbed the back of his neck. You don't think I earned my place here? I leaned forward. You earned a seat. I built the table. Silence. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. I'm sorry. I didn't blink. I really am, he added. I didn't see it at the time, but after you left, after Charles lost it, after Whitney started melting down in front of 200 guests, I realized how much power you had. I just wish you hadn't done it like that. I studied him, not angry, not bitter, just calculating. I did it like that, I said, because I gave you years to notice. And you never did. I reached to the side of my desk, picked up a printed document and held it up to the camera. He squinted. What's that? It's the invoice. For what? For everything. I shared my screen. A full PDF filled the view. Line 1, Carter Corp Systems, Enterprise Licensing Fee, Waiver, Year 1, $2,800,000. Line 2, Executive Consulting Hours, Unbilled, $160,000. Line 3, Private Beta Testing Labor, $74,500. Line 4, Infrastructure Integration, $380,000. Line 5, Uncredited Platform Referral, $500,000. Total value delivered to Sinclair Global, pre-termination, $3,914,500. I paused, then said calmly, This is what my company provided your in-laws before the contract was ever signed. What I gave you, what you never acknowledged. He looked stunned. You're billing us? No, I said. I'm showing you what free labor looks like, what silence costs. I stopped sharing my screen. If you'd treated me like an equal, I added, I would have absorbed the costs. Called it strategic positioning, long-term gain. But you treated me like the help, and now you're going to feel what happens when the help stops helping. Brian let out a long breath. Okay, I get it. No, Brian, I said. You don't. I ended the call. He tried to reach out again the next day. Text. I showed the invoice to Charles. He wants to talk. Reply. There's no further conversation. Call. I let it ring. Email. I forwarded it to legal, then archived the thread. 3 days later, our press memo hit the wires. Carter Corps CEO ends major contract over integrity breach. We prioritize alignment over size, mutual respect over revenue. It trended for 6 hours on LinkedIn. We got 5 new inbound queries from Fortune 500 logistics divisions. One of them signed a letter of intent before the weekend. And Brian? He disappeared from Sinclair Global's About page by the end of the quarter. Rumors said Charles had started restructuring executive leadership. The merger press buzz? Gone. A new COO was brought in from outside the family. Whitney went back to consulting work and posted a cryptic Instagram story with the caption, "When people show you who they are, believe them." I never replied. I didn't need to. I'd already sent the only message that mattered, and it was paid for, in full. Sinclair Global's quarterly strategy meeting took place the second Tuesday of April. Ordinarily, it would have been a tight, confident deck presented by Brian and his team, projected growth curves, logistics forecasts, integration timelines. The room usually ran like a sales pitch to shareholders, peppered with terms like synergy and pipeline resilience. But this time, the presentation didn't start with a projection. It started with a question. What's the plan without Carter Corps? And the silence that followed was long enough to make every executive in that room shift in their seat. Charles Sinclair sat at the head of the long mahogany table in their downtown Dallas headquarters. His fingers drummed slowly against the armrest as his newly appointed COO, a logistics veteran named Meredith Stone, clicked to the first slide. Slide 1. Legacy Logistics Contract Termination, Operational Impact. Juliana's name wasn't written on the slide, but she was everywhere inside it. The first 15 minutes were brutal. Carter Corps' early withdrawal had left 3 warehouse transitions mid-installation. 2 of them were behind schedule by nearly 3 weeks. One regional carrier partner, who had joined the Sinclair expansion because of Carter Corps' integration promises, was now threatening to pull out entirely. Meredith explained it without spin. Carter Corps' systems weren't just software, she said. They were baked into our new demand modeling, inventory auto-routing, and fleet efficiency metrics. Removing them now isn't a simple uninstall, it's surgery. Brian sat with his eyes locked on the table. No charts, no speech, just silence. Slide 4 detailed the projected loss, $9.4 million in added inefficiencies, $1.2 million in vendor relationship erosion, $5.6 million in delayed onboarding for Phase 2 operations. It was the kind of slide that, in a public company, triggers a stock slide. Even in private hands, it was enough to generate whispers, and those whispers were starting to echo. In the next room, 2 junior marketing analysts waited with a draft deck for Sinclair's next investor call. The memo in front of them read, "Reframe Carter Corps departure as strategic shift, focus on in-house innovation, avoid mention of Juliana Carter in external language." But that was getting harder to do, because even in-house, Juliana's work was the foundation. Across the country in Austin, Juliana was seated in a glass-walled conference room with 2 Carter Corps engineers and 3 executives from Veridian Supply, a major logistics firm that had just lost a Sinclair contract and now wanted in. "We heard you pulled out," their CTO said with a half-smile. "That takes nerve." Juliana nodded. "It takes standards." They signed a non-binding agreement for a $6.8 million deployment the same afternoon. Meanwhile, back in Dallas, the strategy meeting at Sinclair was falling apart. Every solution presented, from rebuilding systems internally to sourcing third-party software, came with delays, risks, and spiraling costs. And all of them circled the same problem. Carter Corps wasn't just a vendor. It was the standard. Meredith flipped to slide 8. It was titled, Lessons Learned, Leadership Transparency and Vendor Relations. It included a line, highlighted in yellow, Do not sideline primary stakeholders, even if they're family. No one spoke. Then someone near the back asked, Was this really about a wedding table? Brian didn't answer, because by now they all knew it wasn't. It was about something bigger, something that companies talk about in glossy HR manuals but ignore when it matters: respect. You don't get to ignore the architect while hosting a housewarming party. You don't get to profit off innovation without honoring the innovator. And you don't seat a founder by the kitchen and expect them to stay quiet. In the weeks that followed, Carter Core's name came up in 5 internal meetings at Sinclair, even though the company had officially cut ties. Juliana never re-entered those rooms. She didn't have to. Her name was on every slide that mattered. Outside that boardroom bubble, the business world was watching, quietly impressed, curious, some unsettled. A story circulated on LinkedIn. She built the backbone of a billion-dollar plan and walked away without raising her voice. No hashtags, no tell-all thread, just reputation. At a tech summit in Houston later that month, a panelist brought up the Carter Core move during a roundtable on founder leverage. Juliana, sitting in the audience, watched as VPs and startup CEOs debated the power dynamics between family, contracts, and control. Someone asked if she was there. She didn't raise her hand. She just smiled. It started as a whisper. A few business blogs picked up the contract withdrawal. One published a short piece titled, When Founders Say Enough, Carter Core and the Quiet Exit Heard Round Texas. No salacious details, just a short paragraph noting that a high-profile logistics software company had pulled out of a $30 million deal with Sinclair Global, citing misalignment of values. It might have ended there, but then came the reposts. By Tuesday, that blog article had been shared on 4 tech subreddits and a VC Slack group. Then someone, a former Carter Core intern, now working in San Francisco, posted a tweet. My old boss once built a logistics platform for $1 billion real estate family. They sat her next to the kitchen at their wedding. She terminated the deal 2 days later. Clean, classy, unapologetic. Respect the founder. By morning, the tweet had 15,000 likes. The replies weren't about gossip, they were about boundaries. CEOs, engineers, freelancers, women in STEM, solo founders, dozens of voices joined in with stories of silent contributions, of being left off credits, of being talked over in rooms they built. A hashtag started trending, Built the Table, and people knew exactly what it meant. Juliana didn't post. She didn't need to. But inside Carter Core's office, her team started getting flooded with speaking requests, press inquiries, even podcast offers. Tech reporters reached out from Fast Company, Forbes, and The Verge. Everyone wanted the inside story. She declined all of them. Her only public comment was a pinned LinkedIn post. Leadership isn't about who's at the head table, it's about who built the room. I lead by building, not begging. That post reached over 3.4 million views in 5 days. But it was the comments that mattered more. Dozens of women tagged their companies. Engineers tagged their managers. Founders tagged their past clients. Just pulled a Juliana, renegotiating my rates today. Carter Core just became my North Star. No more free labor masked as exposure. I didn't leave. I escalated. How built the table. Business schools began referencing the Carter Core story in ethics and entrepreneurship courses. One professor from the University of Chicago wrote an article titled, Exit as Power, What Founders Can Learn from Carter Core's Silent Revolution. Juliana didn't attend the lecture, but she was on every slide. Meanwhile, at Sinclair Global, the damage control campaign fizzled. They rebranded. Softly. Brian was phased out of executive mentions. Whitney's family scrubbed social media. A new logistics partner was quietly announced, but without fanfare. The wedding photos? Never published. The power couple story that had been pitched to magazines? Pulled. Because now the wedding had a new legacy, not as a celebration of unity, but as the day a founder said no. At a women's leadership forum in Dallas, Juliana was mentioned in the keynote address by name. She wasn't in attendance, but someone from her team recorded it. The speaker stood on stage and said, "Sometimes you don't raise your voice. Sometimes you don't burn it all down. You just say nothing. You send a contract. And you leave the table they thought you needed." The applause lasted almost a full minute. Juliana watched the clip in her office that night. No smile, just a deep breath. The kind you take when the storm has passed, but the clouds still hang. "I didn't do this to start something," she said quietly to Derek, who sat across from her. "You didn't have to," he said. "You just refused to keep letting them take what you built. That's enough." She nodded. "Still doesn't feel like winning." "That's because it wasn't revenge. It was leadership." He paused, then added, "People saw a woman walk out of a family event with more dignity than most walk into boardrooms, and they recognized themselves." The next morning, Carter Corps' inbox held a message from a mid-size education nonprofit in Illinois. "We don't have Sinclair's budget, but we share your values. Would you consider helping us scale?" Juliana read it twice, then forwarded it to her partnerships lead with a note. "Let's talk to them. Mission first only. I want to keep building, just with the right people." Because for all the noise, all the shares, all the praise and panels and copycat stories, Juliana wasn't chasing fame. She was building something real. And now the world knew it. Juliana was in the middle of reviewing a new proposal from Veridian Supply when her assistant knocked twice on her glass office door. "Juliana," she said softly, "Charles Sinclair is on line 1. He says it's urgent." Juliana didn't look up. "Did he say what it's about?" "He said a second chance." That was the exact phrase. Juliana closed the proposal tab and leaned back in her chair. The window behind her overlooked downtown Austin, the skyline still glowing in the late afternoon haze. She didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Then she said, "Put him through." The line clicked. "Charles," she said, flat, cool. "Juliana." His voice was more gravel than she remembered, less polished. "Thank you for taking the call. I have 15 minutes. "I'll be quick," he said. "I made a mistake." "Which one?" There was a long pause. Then, "I underestimated you. Personally, professionally, publicly. And now? Now I see what happens when you walk away. We didn't just lose a system, we lost confidence, reputation. You made that clear, without saying a word, and I respect it." Juliana said nothing. "I want to offer a chance to rebuild, not the same contract, a partnership, real equity, seat at the table." Juliana's jaw tightened. "Charles," she said slowly, "you had me at the table once, and you left me by the kitchen." He tried again. "This would be different. You'd lead the tech arm. I'll put it under your control. Brand autonomy. Legacy." "Legacy?" she repeated. "Yours or mine?" "Both." "I already have mine." The silence on his end was heavy, and then surprisingly honest. "I didn't know how much power you had." "That's the thing," Juliana said. "I didn't need to show it, until you forced me to." He tried one more time. "Is there any version of this where we start over?" "Yes," she said. "It's called the version where you don't call me 2 months too late." Then she ended the call. No dramatic hang-up, no fire, just finality. An hour later, her assistant stepped back in. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked. Juliana shook her head. "Not necessary. He said what he came to say, and I said what I needed him to hear." "You think he'll call back?" "Number he won't." That night, Juliana poured a glass of wine and sat on her balcony, watching the amber glow of the city slide into blue. She thought about legacy, not the kind you inherit, but the kind you build one quiet, hard-earned decision at a time. She thought about all the years she had chased recognition, fought for validation, waited for the nod that never came. And now that it had come, too late, it meant nothing, because she didn't need it anymore. Earlier that week, Carter Corps' newest client, a public health nonprofit, had doubled their ask. They wanted Juliana's system scaled across 5 states. The impact was real, the numbers didn't lie. The respect came up front, in writing, and on the right paper. She'd accepted the contract without hesitation, because this was the future she was interested in now. No spotlight, just control, clarity, alignment. The next morning, her director of marketing walked in with a list. "Speaking offers," she said, 17 in the last week, 2 keynotes, 1 TEDx. Everyone wants you to talk about the Sinclair pullout. "I already gave that talk," Juliana said. "When?" She smiled. "In silence." The director grinned. "That's cold." "No," Juliana replied. "It's clean." That afternoon, she posted a short update on LinkedIn. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation. Sometimes it's the conversation you no longer need to have. JC. No hashtags. No names. Still, everyone knew what it meant. The post went viral again, without her trying. But this time, she didn't read the comments. Because this chapter wasn't about who was still talking, it was about who was finally listening. Juliana didn't go home for Mother's Day. No text, no call, no card, not out of spite. She had nothing left to prove. It just didn't belong to her anymore. The emotional economy of her family, the unspoken transactions of approval and obedience, had closed for business. They had written her out. And now she was rewriting everything. Carter Core's new downtown Austin office opened in June. Sleek, sharp. Nothing excessive, just efficient. Polished concrete floors, minimalist glass conference rooms, deep green plants, and one framed quote above the welcome desk. "If you don't like the rules, write your own." JC. No one had to ask who it was. The launch event was small, intentional. No media, just clients, team, and a few startup leaders she respected. Juliana stood in the back, watching her team walk investors through the dashboards she'd once built herself at 2 a.m. in a borrowed co-working space. She didn't feel the old hunger. She felt something quieter, steadier, a kind of peace. She'd stopped chasing rooms. She had built her own. Later that evening, her head of people ops handed her a short list of applicants. "All-star talent," she said. "Mostly women. Some from companies that used to pass you over." Juliana smiled. "Funny how that works." "You want to meet them?" "I want to build something they won't want to leave." That night, she took the long way home, past the university where she'd once pitched her first beta to an empty room, past the tiny shared office where her name wasn't on the lease, past the skyline that had grown with her. Her inbox was full, opportunities, interviews, invites, but she ignored it all. Tonight wasn't about more. It was about enough. 3 weeks later, a former Sinclair global manager reached out with a private message. "I just left. You were right. There's no future there anymore. Any chance you're hiring?" Juliana replied with a calendar link. Not because she needed to be right, because she knew how many people had been taught to settle for less. And she was done settling. At the Carter Core Team Summit, she gave a short, unplanned talk. She stood in front of the whiteboard holding a dry erase marker and said, "There's no perfect system, but we can build one where the wrong people don't get to silence the right ones. That starts with who we let sit at the table and who we refuse to let be ignored." Nobody clapped. They just stood with her. By the end of Q3, Carter Core's valuation passed $100 million. Juliana didn't post about it, didn't throw a party, didn't send a press release. She updated her mom's contact to muted and added a new name to the company directory. Brian Carter, no longer VP at Sinclair, now applying for a product strategy role at a boutique analytics firm. She didn't gloat, she just moved forward. One night, Derek found her in the office late, alone, editing a new investor pitch deck. "You don't have to do this," he said. "You could cash out tomorrow." Juliana didn't even look up. "I know. Then why keep going?" She paused. "Because I like who I am when I'm building something real." And that was it. Not vengeance, not validation, just creation. The kind that doesn't wait for applause. That fall, Carter Core launched an initiative, Core Access, a grant-based mentorship and funding track for overlooked founders, especially women and non-traditional entrepreneurs. No equity grab, just tools, connections, and guidance. They funded 14 companies in the first 6 months. When asked what inspired the program, Juliana gave the shortest quote in the company's press kit. "I built something they couldn't write me out of. I want others to have that too." The letter came on thick, ivory paper, hand-addressed, formal. It wasn't an invitation, it was an announcement. The Sinclair Whitney Foundation is proud to honor Charles E. Sinclair III for his contribution to innovation in logistics and supply chain philanthropy. Juliana didn't even finish reading it before setting it aside. No mention of Carter Core, no footnote acknowledging the software platform that had powered their growth, just a name, his, and a headline dressed up as Legacy. It should have stung. But it didn't. Because somewhere along the way, she'd stopped needing her last name to prove anything. Not Carter, not Sinclair, not anyone's stamp of approval. Her work spoke louder, her reputation traveled farther, her legacy was already moving, without her having to hold it up. At Carter Core's quarterly town hall, the theme was Legacy in Motion, not in a ceremonial sense, but real, living impact. Juliana stood on stage for her usual 5-minute update. She kept it short. Legacy isn't what people remember when you're gone. It's what changes while you're still here, because of you. Titles fade, names shift, but what you build, that stays. Applause erupted, but she didn't bask in it. She walked off stage and got back to work. 2 days later, her cousin, one of the few family members she still spoke to, sent a message. "They're acting like you were never part of any of it. It's honestly gross. Want me to say something?" Juliana replied, "Let them pretend. I'm not pretending." That weekend, she visited the Carter Core pilot site in Phoenix, a regional supply co-op using her systems to distribute food and medicine across underserved communities. What started as tech for corporations had quietly turned into an engine for access. In the facility's break room, a handwritten sign on the wall read, "We don't care where you're from, we care what you build." She took a picture of it, not to post, just to remember. Back in Austin, a well-known business podcast host reached out with a familiar pitch. "We'd love to have you on for a segment titled, 'Reclaiming Power from Wedding Guest to CEO. Your story is everywhere.'" She declined. Her story wasn't about a wedding anymore. It never was. That fall, Juliana signed a licensing deal with a public logistics agency in Oregon, her largest government-facing contract to date. When the paperwork arrived, her legal team flagged one minor issue. They had accidentally written her company name as Sinclair Core. She didn't laugh. She corrected it. "Carter Core," she wrote, "and make sure it stays that way." At home, the nameplate on her office shelf still read, Juliana Carter, founder and CEO. She'd thought about dropping the last name once, going by just Juliana in branding, but she changed her mind. Not because she needed the family tie, but because she'd redefined it. Carter didn't mean passive daughter or second-tier sibling or quiet girl in the corner anymore. Carter meant company builder, policy shaper, table flipper. One night, she found an old family photo while cleaning out a drawer. It was from a Christmas years ago, before the divide, before the wedding, before she knew how deep the silence ran. There she was, 12 years old, tucked into a corner of the frame, holding a science kit no one else noticed she'd asked for. She looked at her own younger face for a long moment, then she placed the photo back in the drawer and shut it. Not to forget it, to contain it. Because that girl had grown up. And she'd kept building long after they stopped seeing her. At a Women in Tech dinner, she was asked by a panelist, "What's your greatest professional win?" Juliana smiled. "It's not one deal or launch," she said. "It's the fact that I never needed their name to build one of my own.